Hello.
Our story begins in the midst of a thunderstorm on Coruscant, at the steps of the Jedi Temple. Anakin, 17 years old at the moment, stood with a holocron cradled within his hands. His eyes scanned its rough exterior, outlining the ancient device with his fingers gently. Today was the anniversary of Qui Gon Jinn's death. Anakin frequently tried to forget this day because of how painful it was for him. Not this time though. As he grew older, training with holograms of Maul, utilizing the Force in new ways, feeling power flow through his body, he found himself desiring a certain outcome. He wanted revenge. His instructors and lessons taught him otherwise, but he didn't care. Qui-Gon never deserved to die on Naboo, and it would be his life's work to destroy the Sith for what Darth Maul had done. A crack of thunder lifted his gaze from the Jedi holocron as he slowly let the device slide to the side of his body. His hand hovered over his lightsaber, replaying the security footage from the plasma chambers where Qui-Gon died inside of his head. Obi-Wan didn't know he found it, and Anakin didn't really want anyone else to know what he had discovered at Theed. Skywalker's saber flung into life with a flash of lightning in 3 separate locations across the city. The holocron sat by his side as he weaved his saber aggressively forward. Maul wasn't there, but he could see him in his mind's eye. Every single viewing of that fight brought Anakin closer to Qui-Gon, and gave Anakin a new sense of anger about his would-be master's death. Just as Qui-Gon and Maul fought on Naboo, Anakin mimicked the Jedi Master, but faster, more intense, and even more aggressive. He could feel his saber colliding with Maul, having imagined the Zabrak strength by the way Qui-Gon's saber reverberated every time their weapons clashed. Anakin deflected strikes that would never hit him, and then the moment, he could feel it closing in. Qui-Gon made an error, one that Skywalker spent the longer part of the last 8 years trying to erase from his heart. Maul's saber batted up, and Anakin deflected, swinging through the staff and jabbing his weapon forward, with the bang of thunder again. His saber fell to the ground and bounced just away from his boots. The holocron was not far behind. Anakin's short hair covered his forehead in a way that bangs might. His tunic was soaked, his soul still not healed from the loss, and the presence of an onlooker caught his attention. The pouring rain picked up, and the skies darkened with another rumble from the heavens. Anakin didn't look, but he asked who was watching, as from the corner of his eye, he saw a small figure emerge from the entrance of the temple. A hood covered the individual's head, concealing their identity. Anakin apologized to Master Yoda, before the thicker and deeper voice of another told him that apologies were not for him. Jedi Master Even Peel asked young Skywalker what he was doing out here so late, in the middle of a storm. It wasn't safe, especially not with a conductor like the holocron. Even pulled the device with the Force, moving it away from the two of them to protect them. Anakin's head turned and he apologized again, but Even denied it, because without context there was nothing to be sorry for. Silence sat between the two of them. Master Peel was an interesting Jedi, definitely more maverick-like than most on the High Council, but still a true Jedi Master. His parrot-like voice was most identifiable to Skywalker, but he didn't really know anything else about the smaller Jedi. Peel stepped towards Anakin, asking if there was something troubling him, perhaps something that would be better dealt with verbally. Anakin, despite his better judgment, decided that he could afford to talk to Even about his feelings on this specific topic, because it could be helpful to him and his own problem with wanting to destroy the Sith. Anakin brought up the invasion, or blockade over Naboo. Even almost immediately picked up on what Skywalker was upset about, clearly having everything to do with Qui-Gon's death. So, he decided to tell Anakin a story about the Jedi Master. It was brief, and it brought a smile to Anakin's face. Even was not finished yet. Despite his better judgment, he understood that Skywalker wouldn't rest easily. Swinging his saber in a lightsaber duel with ghosts never led anyone to surreal peace. Master Peel asked Skywalker to take a walk with him. Instead of going inside the temple, they walked along the exterior of it, but under the cover of the actual structure, so they could dry off. The extent of this discussion would revolve around the holocron that Even briefly felt when he moved it. The device held information about a long-forgotten program. It was still in use, but lesser nowadays. The Sith may have returned 8 years ago, but so little were willing to believe that truth. Anakin had seen Maul with his own eyes. As Even learned, Anakin saw a lot more than just the Zabrak apprentice. That didn't matter though. Even knew it wouldn't do anyone anything good to dwell on the old Sith. Instead, he turned his focus towards something he believed might intrigue Anakin some more. The Jedi Shadow Collective, mentioned in the aforementioned holocron, was a secret sect of the Jedi Order. Similar to the Temple Guard unit, the Shadows were a quiet bundle of Jedi who served the side of justice to a different degree. Even Anakin stepped at a different corner of the temple, and he told the young Jedi that he understood how challenging all of this must be for him. His progress had been sufficient, but there was so much more to being a Jedi that he had yet to learn. It wasn't entirely ethical to suggest this because of Anakin's age, but even believed that it would be the right path to set Anakin down. Skywalker watched the smaller Jedi Master as he gave him instructions. Anakin would go to Master Sindralik and inform him of his desire to become a Jedi Sentinel. It would change Anakin's instruction regiment. Master Kenobi would also be informed. The training would initially consist of a regular round initiated by Obi-Wan, a secondary one by the Battle Master, and a third conducted by a Jedi Counselor. From the Sentinel path, Anakin would be able to disappear into the Shadow sect. Even also understood that this could come off as quite forceful, so he would leave this conversation at this: if Anakin wanted that path, it was within his grasps. Master Peel lifted the holocron up into Anakin's hands with the Force and left him with his thoughts. Even hadn't been watching Anakin intently. He was simply old enough to know better. Some Jedi would thrive in different parts of the Order. That's why there were so many different paths. The Jedi Shadow certainly wasn't an average choice, but neither was being a 9-year-old slave from Tatooine turned Jedi apprentice. Even held Anakin in relative respect. He was not exceeding his mandate, just giving elderly propositions in hopes to help Anakin find himself. Being a regular Jedi clearly wasn't really doing it for him, so this was another method. Hopefully, it could positively change the outcome of his own instruction. Anakin would sit on this information for a couple of days, something that surprised Master Peel. The Council had, rightly so, seen Anakin as an impulsive Jedi youngling and Padawan. The amount of thought he put into changing his path was much more than Peel ever thought Anakin would actually put into it, which made him, in a way, regret suggesting it. Though Skywalker needed a change, Obi-Wan was a fine instructor, but it wasn't what Anakin thrived with. Kenobi was now becoming a master of defense, teaching a young man how to be a true Jedi. Anakin loved Obi-Wan, but he needed this for himself, and so at the end of the week, at the end of realizing that he wasn't just upset about Qui Gon's death, and that he wanted to destroy the Sith, he joined the Sentinel path. It surprised Obi-Wan, but he was supportive, as he always had been. Anakin had manufactured this false Obi-Wan in his head, someone who was restrictive and patronizing, but Kenobi was not that here. He joined Anakin in the Sentinel path, and helped him through his first regimental training exercise. Sindralik and then even Peel would complete the next two steps. The Sentinel training course was designed to help the Battle Master determine the appropriate direction. It was already made clear to Master Dralik by even Peel that Anakin was joining this path to become a Jedi Shadow, not a Temple Guard, so he had a heads up there. But still, Sin wanted to check if Skywalker would be proper fit for that program, and he was. However, there was a minor problem. The Jedi Shadow Collective was much smaller than it had been throughout their history. During the past 1,000 years or so, the most individuals inside the group at the same time had been 50. Nowadays, there were only 6 of them. Anakin was becoming the 7th. These Jedi Shadows worked in cooperation with the High Council and Sindralik or any other Battle Master. But it wasn't like they could just summon one to Coruscant to give instruction. They were off doing their own jobs. So Skywalker was given a crash course on his directive as a Shadow. The same aforementioned trio would assist him with this as well. Obi-Wan was, in all fairness, a little upset to be losing his student, but he would become a master because he fully trained Anakin to the next path he would go on. Kenobi was truly attached to Anakin, and he feared that by his apprentice becoming a Shadow, that he had failed him in some capacity. Thanks to Even, though, Obi-Wan recognized that he gave Skywalker the tools to find his own right path. The training to become a Shadow took Anakin about 3 months. It was the hardest instruction he had ever received, but it was also the best. not because it outclassed Obi-Wan, but it was more similar to what he needed and wanted. Kenobi didn't challenge Anakin as much as Skywalker would have preferred, and by challenge, this isn't difficult training. This is physically tormenting exercise. Obi-Wan tested Skywalker's meditation, harmony, and serenity. The Shadow tests, run by Sindralic, Peel, and also Kenobi, examined his lightsaber skills, force powers, and mastery of balance. The final exam, being balance, was the most difficult for Anakin to complete, but he did well enough to be considered a Shadow, thus making him a knight before the age of 18. This was a high accomplishment. In the last 200 years, only 2 other Jedi had ascended at such ages, Master Venestra Rho and Mace Windu. He was among some of the greatest the Order had seen in recent memory, something Anakin should be very proud of. His ceremony of honor was private. Shadows weren't really meant to be seen, like temple guards. The old Jedi took the title pretty literally when it came to Shadow. It was a good day for Anakin though, but his journey had only just begun. While a lot of his training surrounded his physical limitations and expanding them, the work of a Jedi Shadow was a lot more investigative. This was told to him and taught frequently by Master Peel during the past 3 months. But doing this kind of investigative work alone was even more challenging than Anakin initially thought it would be. Luckily, he'd be given all the necessary resources to be successful at this job. Alongside him, he was given an R2 astromech, named R2-U6, a greenish droid with very little personality. Skywalker would utilize also a T6 modified Jedi Shuttle. It was the same ship maker, but the model was colorless, didn't hold the Jedi logo, and it had more weaponry and shielding. It was a vessel designed to fight and win battles. The Order had 10 of these. 6 of them were with the other Jedi Shadows across the stars. Anakin, prior to leaving, was given leads to potential Sith hideouts, things that other Jedi Shadows utilized during their time and within their current operations. This was their collaborative work. Anakin was also instructed to, while having the free reign to do whatever he wanted because no one could control him, contact the Jedi Temple if he ran into any Sith. Even Peel may have considered Anakin more than talented enough to handle his own, but Maul was still capable enough to kill Master Jinn. Maul's instructor, or that instructor's new apprentice, could be challenging as well, if not too much for Anakin to handle. It's why they were so wary, but also willing to trust him with this. Anakin's journey started in the Outer Rim territories. It was a long trip through hyperspace, but it provided Anakin and R2-U6 plenty of time to get acquainted with each other. What Anakin didn't know was the turbulence of galactic politics at the time. He never really paid attention to that kind of stuff. Obi-Wan didn't like being involved in politics, but he always kept an eye on it, because it was important. Skywalker, not knowing about this, didn't realize how close the galaxy was to an all-out civil war. He didn't really care either, but the time was ticking down till he might end up stranded out in the middle of nowhere without any leads back to the Sith. The Outer Rim territories were home though. It's where his journey in life started. He found it easy to navigate the Outer Rim, and frequently he avoided wearing his actual Jedi robes. So people saw his modified vessel, his astromech, and his blaster pistol holstered and thought nothing of him. His jacket hid his lightsaber, but no one needed to know that, unless it got to a certain point. Anakin and U6 continued moving from planet to planet and system to system until he overheard someone talking in a bar. This came about a month and a half into his time as a Jedi Shadow, so about 19 and a half months until a civil war started. No one knew of the clones or the mass armies of battle droids, just the tension in the politics. What Anakin heard piqued his interest, because there were mysterious disappearances frequently happening inside the Watsa sector at Lothal Minor. Anakin listened, and right when they changed topics, he interrupted. The guys at the bar found this to be disrespectful and tried to fight him. Even though he was closing in on almost 18 years old, he still was old enough in their minds to fight. They nearly got beat to death. Anakin didn't even use his lightsaber. He just countered and learned a very important lesson about leverage. Traditional Jedi tactics didn't teach this type of interrogation, but without restrictions or strings tied to his back, he could do whatever he wanted. The reason Peel, Dralik, and Kenobi refused to teach him was because Jedi Shadow learning was typically very on the job. It wasn't something that someone just told you how to do. A Jedi Shadow could mostly come up with their solutions on their own, hence the light training Anakin received prior to actually starting the path. Regardless, the thugs told him about a specific quadrant on Lothal Minor that citizens were being told to avoid because of mysterious creatures taking people down below. Being that Lothal Minor was just a dumping planet, one of the many in the galaxy, people didn't typically stay for long, but if they did, then it was their fault. Anakin and U6 departed immediately. There was a word about magic or the Force that really intrigued Anakin about this location. When they did arrive at the system, they landed, and Anakin had the astromech wait at the ship for him. Eventually, a small snake-like creature named Morley would make himself known to Anakin. He promised knowledge on the disappearances, only if he followed him. Anakin needed intel, so he did, despite his better judgment. Anakin's intuition would be partially right, because Morley attempted to betray him, once they entered a series of tunnels under the main trash piles on the surface. With the swing of his lightsaber, the snake died, but Anakin continued forward, curious to see what else he might find. Not to totally assume that someone might be lingering in the pits of Lothal Minor, but Anakin desperately wanted answers to those disappearances. He traversed further in, searching every crevice until a beaming light crossed the tunnel in front of him. He walked towards it, pressing his hand against his saber. As he came around the corner, he saw the Spider God himself, a horned Darth Maul, hunched over with arachnid legs, mumbling in tongues towards a fire. Anakin ripped his saber from his belt in disbelief. Somehow Maul had returned. The ringing of the saber launched Maul into defense, rearing his legs and turning back to see the young Jedi before him. He mumbled out the words Jedi and something else as fury covered his aging face. Maul had seen the worst since his defeat to Kenobi, and Anakin believed he deserved it all, plus some. However, even in his blinding rage, Skywalker found it within himself to demand answers from the individual. Maul recognized the Jedi aspect of this opponent, but without his snake friend to aid him, he attempted to find his own weapon, which ended up being a spear-like object from a star cruiser. Anakin walked around and paced across from the fire as he asked Maul for more answers. The aging Sith apprentice had none of them. He had little words to express anyways. His barbaric existence only was perpetuated by the torture his master trained him with prior to his defeat on Naboo. That was the only reason he was alive now. Maul felt cornered, and as Sidious had instructed, if he felt cornered by a Jedi, he needed to kill it. Maybe he'd be abandoned by Palpatine again, but if he could return to his master with a new saber, perhaps there was a chance at forgiveness or reconciliation. Maul lunged at the Jedi Knight. Anakin readied his weapon, pouncing to the side when the legs leapt into the air at him. Skywalker's saber dashed between those legs, slicing a few but not actually cutting them off. Maul's rusted spear jabbed at Anakin, missing as it slid between his arm and his ribs, almost cutting him. The Jedi backed away, missing his chance to counter effectively. All of his training meant nothing when his raging adrenaline rushed through him. He needed to calm down, and that's what he did. Anakin reverse gripped his saber and steadied away from Maul, who adjusted himself to the new wounds on his legs. He lunged in again, too impatient to wait this out. The spear jabbed downwards. Anakin ripped his saber into the weapon and rolled out of the way, using the Force to throw Maul towards the fire. The arachnid legs lodged themselves into the ground, and like his master had 8 years before, Anakin swept his saber across Maul's stomach and watched him drop to the ground. His hands dug into it as he panicked, remembering the fatal blow that changed his life 8 years before. Skywalker towered over him. Without a pit to fall down, Maul felt as pathetic and helpless as he did before, but nothing to soften his loss to an even younger Jedi. Anakin shoved his saber at Maul's throat and demanded answers about the Sith. The Shadow sect of the Jedi Order was permitted to use unorthodox methods. Similar to Windu's mastery of Vapad, these Shadow Jedi operated without full oversight from the High Council. These were, in a way, rogues, and Anakin took advantage of that immediately, once again. Maul squirmed and backed up until the fire started to sizzle against his shoulder. Anakin shoved his saber so close that the heat burnt through the skin cells on the Zabrak's neck. Anakin asked questions about the Sith Lord and his plans. The tragedy is, Despite his amnesia and his tragic state of existence, he didn't know much about Palpatine's plans. He had always been a brute. Perhaps if he had survived Naboo, he would have learned the truth, but not in this timeline. What he could reveal about Sidious was a lair on Coruscant, a contact from Sereno, and a home world of Naboo. The Dark Lord attacked his own people, even though he represented them in some capacity. Maul begged for his life. Anakin had started the interrogation promising a chance for survival if Maul told the truth, but Skywalker only saw Qui-Gon's shocked expression when Maul killed him. Maybe it wasn't ethical or the Jedi way, but this was one life for another. Maul watched the saber, and it, at least in some capacity, ended his suffering. Anakin ripped the weapon out and kicked the dead body. He wanted to mutilate it further, but he withheld himself. Qui-Gon had been avenged. Maul was dead. Skywalker would return to the modified T6 shuttle and relay the information to the Jedi Temple from the orbit of Lothal Minor. As the transmission was sent, and he waited for a response from Coruscant, he decided that his hard work deserved a reward, and set course for Tatooine. Anakin had just killed a Sith. While Shmi had never really left his mind, becoming a Jedi Shadow never really encompassed getting back to his mother. After having finished one of his objectives, he realized what else he could do with his time, without direct oversight. His arrival to Tatooine wouldn't take long, due to the short jump from the Watsa sector. Anakin searched for Shmi and received intel from Watto, thus leading him to the Lars homestead. Instead of displaying his rugged street clothes, used to conceal his identity, he met his mother with a huge embrace while wearing the robes of a Jedi Knight. No longer did he have his Padawan braid, and no longer did he stay on Coruscant. He believed as a result that he was making a difference. In all fairness to him, the information sent back to Coruscant was very important, yet its ramifications would be truly defining for those impacted by them the most. To young Skywalker, finally spending time with his mother, he couldn't really care about the Sith anymore. He just finished Obi-Wan's work, a full circle moment for their lineage, killing Maul, who had killed Qui-Gon. To meet the Lars was certainly something. He didn't really care for them that much, but he was glad that Shmi was happy and safe. That was really what all of this was about, and she was also saddened to learn about Qui-Gon's fate. Anakin would stay on Tatooine for a couple of days, before leaving to continue his own work in the Outer Rim territories, seeing if he could gather anything else from Maul's intel. The Lars would also give their communication frequency, so that he and Shmi could call each other as frequently as they needed. Outside of Anakin's continued adventure, which followed a trail to Naboo, the Jedi made their own moves. Anakin's work, along with the fully confirmed death of Darth Maul, was beneficial to the Jedi Order. Thanks to having time as their ally, the Council came to its conclusion. Anakin may have not remembered that Palpatine was the Senator of Naboo during the blockade, but the Jedi did. Most of them were still on the Council, so they voted. The conclusion to their vote was a call to action. The Jedi didn't know where to look per se, so their own investigation started with Palpatine. They couldn't just act immediately, so they trailed him. For months, this would continue. Both the Jedi and Anakin were working on their own separate cases. Skywalker was warming up to Senator Amidala, hoping to find out information about an individual who represented them during the crisis. He didn't think she had done it, but that was his curiosity. She was on Tatooine. Maul was on Tatooine. When she returned, Maul also returned. Of course, he wasn't stupid, so he didn't think she was behind it, but he had to, clear her. More than anything, this was just his excuse to spend more time around her, which she didn't really mind because she still thought favorably of him. On Coruscant and around the capital, the Jedi trailed the Chancellor for months. He made moves they found to be weird. His alliances and discussions were always jammed, so no one could hear into the rooms or use listening devices. The only way to hear anything was actually be in the room. This jamming came especially in hand with Count Dooku of Sereno. It slowly became the Council's concern that the Jedi Master had ties to the potential Sith. That was Palpatine. It should also be stated that at this time, Palpatine had secured his power with the Emergency Powers Bill, so he was already extending his time as Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The Jedi couldn't just sweep in and arrest him for the basis of quote-unquote being a Sith in a galaxy that did not remember them, so they had to work around that. Also, the Jedi couldn't fully back their claim up, so they waited, observed, and gathered as much evidence against him as possible. There were also those who kept an eye on Senator Amidala, Representative Binks, Captain Panaka, and the current Queen's administration. But none of these led to anything. It was the in-person meetings with Count Dooku that brought Jedi suspicions to higher highs. One might wonder why they met in person. It had to do with Palpatine, firstly, exerting his power and control over Dooku. Secondly, it was maintaining secrecy. Long-range communications had a higher chance of being intercepted, even by accident, and Palpatine was just a little too paranoid sometimes, especially without the war going on. His doubles had kept the Jedi off of him for a good while, but it didn't last forever, which was now his problem. Dooku and Palpatine didn't meet inside the Chancellor's manor. They spoke at the works. All their big updates came through there, otherwise couriers would deliver mail to each of them, to keep things as quiet as possible. Perhaps not the most efficient, but before the war they didn't exactly need constant communication. The Jedi wouldn't jump at the Sith in their meeting. They would conduct a raid following the discussions, when both Sith had left. It would be a highly effective mission for the Council, leading to more revealing information about the Sith, their plans, and some of their already in place decisions. The clone army, which ironically Anakin had gotten sidetracked by, would be unveiled, though a concerning reality for the Jedi became the fate of their order. They believed in the Republic, and what it could be, but many of the elder members of the Council had come to the conclusion that well-placed faith in a government entity did not save it from itself. The people who represented the institution were not what its creators wanted, potentially foresaw, but not what they envisioned in the best-case scenario. The Jedi, with their history, decided that with their time before conflict broke out, because they had gathered intel on when the war would start, would remove themselves from Coruscant. The galaxy was a bubbling pot, and they could add more fuel to the inferno burning under it. They could overflow the separatist movement and completely splinter any support for ending the tension. It would be a bombshell with 100 alternative reactions, many of which could frame the Jedi as the potential villains in this. Well, despite their attempt to neutrally approach the situation by informing the Senate about Palpatine's loyalties, the Senate would react as a corrupt entity. This wasn't because of the information, it was actually because they misconstrued the messaging. The Jedi had just informed them that Count Dooku and Palpatine were collaborating to destroy the galaxy by war. What the Senate heard was former Jedi Master Dooku was dividing the Republic and attempting to sway the mind and heart of their dear leader into conflict. It was a terrible mess. The Jedi were forced from the Senate after 1,000 jeers filled the halls. Those with the Confederacy damned Dooku, and they damned the Republic, and while they were at it, they damned the Jedi too. It wasn't really that personal. There just wasn't a fair way for the Jedi to remove themselves from the equation. The Jedi was dead set on rebelling, on conflict, and even with the Jedi Order moving its best members into key positions to take out the Sith, it didn't stop the divide after the Sith were killed. The Confederacy would arguably be much weaker, and instead of the Federation siding with the CIS, it would be the Republic. And even more ironic, because Jango was hired by Count Dooku and needed his last payments, he brought the clone army to the Separatists. The Jedi, though, once having fully dealt with the Sith, relocated inside the galactic core. Tython was their ancient home world, and they would construct a new temple within the forests of the planet. Instead of utilizing the old one, which people did know about, they opted for more seclusion and protection. It would work for their benefit too. The flame stoked for the Civil War, or Clone War, would continue into a split conflict. Civil War truly was a more appropriate title for this conflict, because the Separatists were divided too. Some systems sided with Dooku, even though he lied. Others wanted a new coalition. Some systems accepted the clones. Others chose their own militaries. The Jedi from afar, after killing off their ancient rival, thanks to Skywalker's shadow work, had to mediate the galactic conflict in their own way. With total disunion filling the galaxy, and the Federation trying to take more control, the Order was forced to involve itself on minor levels. All 7 Jedi Shadows would be brought to Tython and sent out to do recon missions against the major corporations that provided military to the Republic. The thorn in the side of the Republic, though, was the location of all these Foundry worlds. Even though the Republic was given a massive droid army, all of its production facilities were near one of the 3 different separatist coalitions, making them extremely easy targets. So while the Republic had the largest military by far, every battle droid and cruiser lost to combat could not be replaced. The CIS reserve force that the Sith planned to use in the future would be found by one of the Separatist coalitions and also be used against the Republic. It was a terrible war to navigate. Sometimes clones would be ordered to kill their brothers for being enlisted by certain planets of a different confederacy that should have been united to begin with. Battle droids were everywhere, and while the core remained relatively untouched, when it did get touched, it faced the worst of the war. The coalitions united over one point, destroying the galactic core and making them pay for their galactic negligence. They couldn't get along on anything else, but that didn't matter, because they were all gunning for more blood. The Clone War this time around would not end with a Sith victory, or emergency powers that no one knew about. It would slowly fizzle out, with the majority militia coalition of the Confederacy stepping away to join either the Clone Coalition, Droid Coalition, or the Neutral Systems. The Republic would theoretically win the war, but at a cost. It would become this tiny little government, overseeing a collection of planets inside the deep core. As the war prolonged, many systems left the Republic. These included Chandrila, Alderaan, Naboo, Ryloth, Rhodia, and so forth. These representatives did not support the war, and they lost interest in the Republic. Systems just outside of the deep core avoided oblivion by siding with a coalition and creating fortifications to aid the fight against the Republic. Even though the deep core pretty much won by not facing major conflict, the corporations would pay the price, and the Republic even more so. The Jedi intermingling with the Federation and so forth saved billions of lives, simply by sending spies and shadows into major operation facilities and shutting down entire flanks of battle droids. It's also why the Republic shrunk so much. In the end, there would be 4 major factions: the Republic, led by Coruscant, the Neutral Systems, led by Mandalore, the Clone Confederation, led by Araxis, and the Droid Coalition, led by Mygeeto. There'd be continuous fighting for years, and while the Jedi faded from relevance, they, on the bright side, were not blamed for the escalation of conflict. That went solely to the Republic. So while they kept the deep core, they didn't keep the trade and resources that the Palpatine-era Republic saw, thus leading to a total economic decline and eventually the crash that saw the deep core fully split up. The Jedi on Tython remained away from the public eye. Knights continued to help people and do humanitarian work, but no one knew where the Jedi hailed from. Their home was a secret, and it would stay that way. The 5-year-long Clone War saw the Jedi Shadow Collective grow by 300 members. Anakin remained one of them, but because the Shadows were kind of loose cannon Jedi, he remained aloof in the galaxy. He saved his mother from the Tuskens the day after they took her, and he didn't slaughter the entire village. He eventually also married Padme Amidala of the Neutral Coalition, and their marriage wouldn't really be that secretive, but the information never reached Tython anyways, so it was fine. Anakin's work as a Shadow, instead of hunting the now dead Sith sect, would challenge other dark groups. His prized victory would be over the leader of the Knights of Ren. Their group was among 5 or 6 other dark acolyte-led groups around the galaxy. The Jedi Shadows would deal with them each, and become more permanent roles inside the Jedi Order, because the Jedi Shadow role evolved into a broad range of different responsibilities. As a result of his path, though, Anakin's only real relationship with the Order remained with Obi-Wan, Even Pill, and the Sindralic. Aside from them, he didn't interact with anyone inside the Jedi Temple on Tython. It was a nice balance. He was a Jedi without actually really being one, and since he was one of the original 7 Jedi Shadows before the Clone War, he was permitted to keep his T6 modified shuttle, which inevitably became a family yacht when Padme and he eventually had their children in the mid-30s. The galaxy may have been divided, but it was for the better. The rampant corruption was disappearing with new leaders taking the galactic stage. The Sith were destroyed, and minor dark factions vanished every other year. The loss of Qui Gon, finally, after all of it, was given closure, and Skywalker's life was and remained the perfect balance of Jedi and romance for the rest of his life. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button, let's talk about this story. Taking the route of Jedi Shadow with Anakin, certainly I felt had to be different than the Sentinel path that I did with the Battlemaster and the Temple Guard a long time ago. I felt that this story would be really interesting if his main foe was Maul. I think Maul kind of gets forgotten about because he's in the Clone Wars, but he doesn't have a lot of relevance and after Dooku removes Anakin's arm. And so it made sense that, especially with the story starting, I think at 24 BBY, that Anakin's main competition, main enemy would be Darth Maul, because that's the only person that's really hurt him or wronged him from the Sith side. I thought that using Even Peel also would make sense. Even Peel's just an interesting Jedi. I actually really like him. He's kind of funny. He's kind of like a goober. So, he's pretty cool. I feel like he'd be the type of Jedi to be like, hey, you're kind of cool. Plus, I don't really get to use him that much because he dies in Clone Wars, and he's kind of just funny. I don't know, his voice is funny. I like his voice. As for the galactic conflict, I really do feel that the galactic conflict is inevitable. I know in some scenarios I go the route where it doesn't happen. I feel like the Clone Wars / conflict is like 99.9 times likely to happen. So when I don't do it, which is in some other stories, it's like that 0.0001% chance that it wouldn't happen. Whereas here, I thought it would be fun to kind of just divide it up. Obviously, I didn't go too deep into the conflict, but I think the Republic would somehow fumble the bag with the droid army. I just thought that was kind of ironic. Like, they get the droid army, but they manage to just fumble it because they don't have the CIS reserve force, and they're kind of dumb. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always, remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.